Oh, good afternoon, Professor Spooner.
Good afternoon, Frank. As usual, things are changing faster and faster, and the challenge is to see just exactly how they're related to globalization and exactly how we should understand them in order to see the relationship to globalization. I've been watching the elections, as I'm sure you have, and probably everybody else. But it seems to me, it's always seemed to me that democratic countries that have more than two major parties have great trouble forming governments because they have to form coalitions. And the Italian case is probably the what should I say,
The most well-known example.
Yes, that everybody knows something about, and I forget now. I saw the number of how many prime ministers they've had in the last 50 years.
You can't keep count.
But I can't remember how many it was.
The Red Brigades were unsure as to who to kidnap.
England and America have had two main parties pretty much since party government began. In the parties, since there's been a little change in just exactly which the two main parties are. But now in both cases, that doesn't seem to be working so well, because there's the parties used to be held together by whips. Mm-hmm. And that worked, and it meant that each party was a united point of view, and one was the government and one was the opposition, and that was meant that the government was always accountable. But that doesn't seem to be working anymore. It seems as though there's a lot of opposition within each party. Mm-hmm. And in the English case, one of the parties has more or less collapsed anyway. There's another country that's been having that problem recently.
Israel.
Well, not clear what's going to happen in the Iranian election yet, but. Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, it's interesting, because if you wind it all the way back, thousands and thousands of years, to a clan or a small tribe sitting around a fire night after night, coming to the realization that the farmland that they've been on for generations has now been depleted, and they need to go somewhere else, or the grazing lands are depleted, and they try to get a consensus as to whether they should all go. It's a binary choice whether they're all going to go or they're going to stay. But there are some people who will decide to stay and will not be with the unanimous vote one way or the other. So the situation that's created, it seems, is too binary to be inclusive of the way things are today with the tools of globalization that are available. There are too many different opinions to be encapsulated within choice A or choice B. And I don't know how society moves ahead in this matter.
But can we see why it's happening now?
I think perhaps, and this might be an ill-informed observation, I think perhaps it has always been happening, but we might not have recognized it in such a pronounced manner, because those voices who were not in choice A or choice B have now been empowered.
What I was going to suggest was that because we need to find out whether it's related to globalization in some way. And it seems to me that whereas everything could be united into two-party opposing points of view up mm-hmm. until now, that's becoming difficult because the size of the population in the countries that have been running the system is now requires more than two options. Now, of course, the next question is, well, England is 60 million and America is 330 million. So if it works, if it's been working in America until recently, why won't it continue to work in England for a long time? But somehow the people who were satisfied with 2 points of view in England up until recently aren't satisfied with 2 points of view anymore. And so each of the efforts to unite opinion around two separate policy, manifestos is failing.
Oh, miserably, miserably.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. I suppose it all goes back to what the way forward is. Is it simply a rule of the majority? Is that the way it's going to be? Then everybody else, the other 49.99% or however many it is, depending upon what's constituting the majority, just simply has to keep quiet and go along with the flow? Or do they voice their opposition the way they've been given the ability to do now? I don't know. I mean, in some respect, you could almost look at this and say it's so much noise, and just put it to the side. More bombast. I mean, the election results are the election results. But on the other hand, anybody who's been elected can't ignore the bombast. They have to pay very close attention to it, because if they don't, they won't be reelected. And that governs their actions, which is the whole precise reason of democracy to begin with, I think.
But the one of the big problems that we've foreseen for globalization is we can't imagine how there's going to be a global government.
I know your sense on that is that it is inevitable long into the future. I suspect that we've talked about this.
Well, the only, and I think I probably said this before as well, that the only international organization with a single functioning authority is the Catholic Church.
Correct. Correct.
And that seems to be working pretty much okay for the time being, although it's not, doesn't seem to be quite so strong as it used to be. So the question is there a relationship between size of participating people people participating in public opinion and the problem of organizing authority? And because one wonders whether the fact that Scotland is moving to leave the United Kingdom may have something to do with this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, there's no doubt that if you break down the population units into much smaller fragments, then they respectively become much easier to govern. All right, that's almost like a math equation, but for the reasons that we often discuss, is you have a smaller group, more localized concerns, and they're able to govern what's in front of them. It's the whole Jeffersonian idea of Republican government. You keep the interference from the large federal sector in abeyance and let us do our business here, and then if we need to unify for purposes of a war or a calamity, we'll call you or send a horseback rider and ask for help. And in some ways that's attractive, but there's a big dangling piñata, a glittering piñata that's really throwing a monkey wrench into that theory, and that is the attractiveness of continued interaction between people outside of that small unit brought upon by globalization capabilities now. People aren't satisfied staying in that small unit any longer, but there's no concurrency between that dissatisfaction with remaining in the small unit and a willingness to, I think, accept their governmental leadership coming from outside the small unit.
I think that you've touched on one of the big problems of globalization, which is beginning to emerge now, and that is the relationship between locality and authority. Because up until the middle of the last century, very few people moved around very much. The amount of movement has been increasing in the last 50 years, and even though population growth is now declining, movement is continuing to increase. And that's part of the reason why nation states are having difficulty managing their borders. And that also has something to do with authority. And it's difficult to see what the world is going to be like in the future if people are moving around all the time. Mm-hmm. And presumably the ability to move around faster and faster is going to keep increasing.
You would think so, yes.
Which means that we're going to have some global management. Let's stop calling it government. And the only way for people to participate in it is going to be through their cell phones, probably.
Yeah, but you know, it's
you can't vote unless you're a resident in a constituency.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, it's a funny thing, because in the 1880s and 1890s, they had all those conventions in Europe that the United States and even Japan and whoever else was remotely industrialized at the time joined. All of these general international agreements on how to measure thermal units, how to measure time, how to measure distances, initially spurred by the idea of leavening out railway schedules between European countries, the general agreements on standards. And these things still go on today. I mean, there are all sorts of common agreements between Iran, North Korea, the United States as it relates to the digital world. And I mean, there is a foundation there. And people who use cell phones every day may not be aware of it. But the reason they're able to use them that way is because of a common agreement between everybody. There are no countries that are off that grid. They have to be on it to play. And if that's something to be built on, fine, it could be. Or if that's all there is going to be, that may also be fine too, depending upon your viewpoint.
Well, the big problem with that, which is something that's been worrying me for some time, that is that if anything goes wrong with it, nobody knows anything about it.
This is true. This is true.
And we still have liberal arts education, which trains everybody to participate in the world as it used to be, but not as it is now. Mm-hmm. We have a writing requirement, but not a programming requirement. Mm-hmm. And I feel that we're moving into a world that's managed by small groups of specialists who, in fact, are not organized into any larger organization of management.
Well, let me ask you a question then. In light of all this, how is it that you continue to remain optimistic about the future? I'm interested in knowing. I'd like to know.
I think it's probably partly genetic, but the reason that by the rational argument that I can give is that as more and more minds come together and work together, and our ability to learn collectively increases, our rate of innovation also increases. And that means that we're likely to be better able to solve problems, however unsolvable they may look from our current perspective. So that's my rational argument for optimism. But I think I'm just basically an optimist.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, as they say. All right. I think we're there.
We're there? Okay.
All right, Professor. Thank you very much. We'll talk next week.
The optimism gets us through to next week.
Oh, let's hope so. God knows what will happen now. All right. Bye.
Bye.